The Skill of Forgiveness by Svetlana Zhiruk, read by James Buchman. This book will help you forgive. Of course, only if you truly want to. There are people who understand that it is necessary to forgive, but they don't want to do it. And there are those who want to but don't know how. This book will be useful for both. Why should we forgive in the first place? There are many reasons. The first and most obvious is that a person holding a grudge goes through emotional suffering. It feels as if there is a stone weighing on your heart. Most likely, this is the reason that prompted you to work on your condition, because it's burdensome and hard. You want to feel light and free within yourself. The second reason why we need to forgive is that resentment guides a person in decision-making. For example, it's about the desire to take revenge, to prove something, to withdraw within oneself, or to show aggression. The pain of resentment compels people to behave in a certain way, and in order to be free from being controlled by your own pain, you need to know how to forgive. The third reason is that resentment, in the long run, shapes one's destiny. The decision that a person made in a state of pain, in a burst of anger or hatred, can affect the quality of life as a whole. For instance, one might not communicate with their parents, mother or father, for years. One might get stuck in a dead-end relationship, and this prevents them from building new relationships. Due to resentment, by and large, any relationship becomes emotionally cold, complicated, and very often withers completely. We've outlined 3 reasons why it's worth forgiving. Perhaps one is enough for you. You want to forgive so that you can feel light in your soul. Having decided on that, you will ask how to do it. It's simple. You need to be dedicated and consistent on your journey of self-work. And this book will be your guide. You just have to hear and trust what is said here in this book. Not just listen, but truly hear. Are you ready? Then let's begin. In a conflict called resentment, we can distinguish 3 periods. Here is a story. Can you believe it? Today I lost both my husband and my friend. I came home a day early. I wanted to show up unexpectedly. I thought that would be a pleasant surprise. I opened the door with my own keys, and in the apartment there was a mess. The bed was all rumpled, and they were both smoking on the balcony. Oh my, what are you going to do now? I don't know. What are your options? I don't know yet. They didn't notice me. I quietly left and came here to you. Friend, what should I do? We need to think. Do you think you will forgive him or not? No. Are you kidding? I can't forgive this. I need to calm down and figure out how to get my revenge. I need to do something so awful that he'll remember it for the rest of his life. 3 years of living together. So many plans. Everything was so good. Why did he do this to me? When a conflict has just occurred, there is no desire to forgive. More often than not, on the contrary, you want to punish the person who wronged you, to cause pain in return, to tell others how despicably this person acted. That's what happens first. Then some time passes, and a lot changes. You know, it's been 3 months now. I am tired. That scene is constantly before my eyes. Then our meeting, my hysteria. Every day I fall asleep thinking about him. These thoughts creep into my mind on their own. But the interesting thing is that before, thoughts about him used to be good. That's because we loved each other. And now it's all negativity, some kind of hatred. Tell me, will this ever end? Will it ever get easier for me? So the second stage comes. Having been satiated with the agony of anger and rage, one begins to realize that it's difficult to live with this. There's no feeling of lightness or freedom in the heart, but there is another feeling instead, a sense that your energy is draining away. And here, inevitably, a question arises. Do people who are in a state of conflict have some kind of connection between them or not? You would have noticed that when we're offended by someone, we experience an unpleasant feeling in the chest area, the heaviness of resentment. And it won't go away until you've forgiven the person. This sign indicates that during the time of conflict with someone who wronged you, an energy connection forms, an unresolved situation. In fact, there is a mental connection between people in a relationship. It can be imagined as energy threads that connect people. This connection can be positive or negative. For example, one person may be deeply in love and experience tender feelings for another. Other people may hate each other, be enemies, competitors, rivals. They know about each other, experience negative feelings, and reinforce the energy connection with their attention. After all, energy goes where we direct our attention. Also, this energy connection can be stronger or weaker. This depends on the concentration of feelings, on the frequency of interaction with the person, on whether it's a blood relationship or not, and other factors. For example, the mental connection with someone you love, for example your partner, your spouse, your mother, is very different from the connection with a colleague at work or with any other person. It's so palpable that in some cases people can feel each other at a distance. One can feel the pain, fear, or death of the other person. Or has it ever happened that you just thought about someone and they immediately called? All this tells us that people are energy beings, and an energy connection is always formed when there is some psycho-emotional interaction between people. It's fueled by either positive or negative emotions. If it's not fueled, it fades away. But in cases where there's a conflict, this connection is especially strong and long-lasting, until the conflict is resolved. The more we think about each other, the more anger and hatred we feel, the stronger it becomes. And it doesn't matter what separates us, be it a distance of 1,000 kilometers or else 3 years since the beginning of the conflict. Still, the connection does exist. That's why it's so hard. The feeling is as if there's a stone on the heart. And so, when the offended person has suffered enough, the third stage comes. The decision is made. I want to forgive. I want to forgive. I want to break this painful connection. I want to be free. How blissful it is to be free, strong, whole, just because you aren't suffering from any emotional pain, including the pain of resentment. But it takes time to realize it and achieve this state. Who we get offended by. Imagine a situation. You're driving a car, and suddenly, at the traffic lights, someone shouts insulting words at you. Something about your driving didn't sit well with him. What do you think? Will the insults from a stranger hurt you deeply? Most likely you'll respond aggressively, standing up for yourself. Or else you won't react at all and forget the unpleasant incident literally in a moment. But what if the same thing is said by someone you love? Let's say your partner. He or she insults you and rudely comments on your driving. Will it be unpleasant? More likely yes than no. The thing is, we get hurt by those we love and by those with whom we have some kind of relationship. Friends, companions, family. Words said by people who we don't care about don't affect us. Their opinion means nothing to us. A person gets hurt by someone they love when they touch a sore spot, comment on something personal. For example, comments about excess weight or appearance. When we first met, you were so gorgeous, and now... In this example, you can see a double blow. A loved one whose words hit right in the heart and touched on a sensitive topic, a personality complex. A woman is already concerned about her appearance without any additional comments. Who on earth would marry you? You're a bad housekeeper. You can't do anything, someone's mother shouts in anger. Anyone who hears such words will be hurt, because the words of loved ones easily hit the heart when it's defenseless, bypassing all defensive barriers. As we can see from the above, it follows that resentment by itself is not something autonomous. Conflict is always part of a relationship. And to study the nature of these painful feelings, you have to do it in the context of relationships, not as something self-standing and disconnected. I'll go ahead and say that knowing how to forgive is not enough. You need to build relationships in such a way as to prevent possible disasters. If you're in a relationship with a person, it is supposed to be emotionally warm, clean, respectful. Otherwise, what is the point of being in one at all? And what if there is no relationship with the opponent, but there is still a conflict? For example, if a stranger caused harm to health by carelessness, or caused material damage, or, God forbid, took the life of a loved one, then what? Should we forgive that too? Yes, we should. The path in this process may be different than with a loved one, but the ultimate goal is the same: restoring peace. Life is long. Anyone can find themselves in all sorts of situations. Even at this point, there would have been many cases in your life when it was necessary to forgive, and there may be still more up ahead. The main message of this book is that forgiveness is a skill. It's not a one-off thing. It's the ability to cope with any pain in any relationship. It's necessary to understand the origin of resentment. That is, how resentment appears in the heart. How resentment appears. One of my favorite topics is the structure of the soul, the inner world. There is so much unknown and mysterious there, and at the same time, there are many simple, clear, sequential processes. For example, the mechanism of how resentment is born. A human is both the body and the soul at the same time. A body without a soul is a corpse. A soul without a body is just a soul. Since you're reading this book, you're a living person, and there are psycho-emotional processes taking place inside you. It's these processes that have to be understood. The soul is an intelligent, indestructible entity that possesses 3 powers. Thinking power. Right now, there is a stream of thoughts in your head. You can also remember, analyze, imagine, receive, process, and output information. All these are psychological processes running in the head. Volitional power. You have free will. You have your own opinion, your own desires. You are completely autonomous from others, right? Perceptual power. The soul has an organ called the spiritual heart. This is the place where feelings are born. It's located in the area of the physical heart. The heart that pumps the blood and the one that gives birth to feelings overlap. Close your eyes. Focus your attention on what's happening in your head. Observe the flow of thoughts. Now direct your attention lower, at the chest area. What do you feel? Are you calm or not? Light or heavy? Now think about a person you love. What are your feelings? First, their mental image appeared in your mind, and a pleasant feeling appeared in the chest area in unison with this, as it were. We call this feeling love. When we miss someone, we experience unpleasant sensations in the chest area. When we're angry, it's as if our soul flares up. Observe these processes, because they pass unnoticed for our active attention in everyday life. We simply live by feelings but don't go into the details of why and how this happens. Now it's important to understand the mechanism of how resentment and other feelings are born. You heard something good, and your heart skips a beat with joy. You heard something bad, and you feel a prick of pain. Now there are no questions about joy. We simply experience positive emotions and feel pleasure. But it's more complicated when we feel pain. What do we do with it? How do we react to it? Christianity teaches us this. Originally, humans were designed for bliss. That's why we devote our entire lives to seeking pleasure and steering clear of suffering. After the fall of man, pain, illness, old age and death appeared in the lives of humans. Now it's as if these are obstacles that occasionally have to be dealt with as they come along. If you don't do this, they seem to accumulate and hurt the soul. It's not easy to live when there are a lot of hard feelings towards different people. It's hard when you haven't forgiven, haven't accepted, haven't realized, haven't understood, haven't resigned yourself. Everything that a person hasn't assimilated at the level of the mind will cause resistance at the level of feelings. And we should also note that it's impossible to get used to suffering. Yes, you can learn to endure it, but never would a person want to do this by their own choice. Everyone strives to avoid pain, given a chance. Perhaps it's impossible to write a book like this one when you haven't experienced firsthand the main concepts laid out here. In my life, I've had an experience when for many years I carried resentment in my heart, when my consciousness at all times was ready to actually attack the person who had wronged me, to give vent to my grievances, to ask questions, when my soul craved justice, revenge, retribution. Resentment is like stones that you carry in your bosom. They don't warm you, don't help you. They only take away your strength, because you are carrying a heavy load. So, what have we found out? The mechanism of how feelings are born. The mind has captured something bad, and we're experiencing bad feelings. The mind has received good information, and pleasant feelings appear in your heart. Also, our consciousness has the ability to interpret the information we receive. We can't but admit that people react differently to the same thing. I'm a witness to a situation where a stray cat occasionally defecates in the entrance of our building. All the residents behave differently. Some get inwardly very angry, and when the opportunity arises, they express themselves emotionally. Someone passes by the puddle turning away, as if to say, "This doesn't concern me, I don't want to either see or hear anything. Someone else will clean it up." The person kind of distances themselves and doesn't care about what happened. And someone will express dissatisfaction at the earliest opportunity, without keeping it inside, and will offer a solution to the problem. A person has the ability to change their opinion, to look at a situation from different angles. It's the ability to change the angle of looking at things, to mentally put yourself in someone else's shoes that helps you cope with your feelings, to take a step beyond subjective perception. Resentment is a figure that can be looked at from different angles. For example, resentment can be compared to a wound in one's soul. It's like a splinter piercing the heart, and while it's there, the soul hurts. This is exactly what you feel. Our task is to learn how to remove these splinters. My childhood passed in a private, detached house. I remember how children from the whole street would gather, we would play a lot, run around, ride bicycles, and we often fell down. I remember as if it were yesterday. You'd sprawl with bare-skinned knees on the dirt road, the wound burning. It hurts to walk, you want to cry. And also the wound has to be washed, treated, and given time to heal. The thing is, it's exactly the same with emotional wounds. But in the case of skinned knees, it's clear that the wound is not serious, and it's quite easy to deal with it. You just apply some antiseptic and wait. But what if it's a fracture, a dislocation, or a sprain? More serious measures have to be taken. It's important to understand that resentment, just like a wound on the body, can be small or large, serious or not serious, short-term or long-term. The way how to forgive depends on what kind of pain you have. Here are some examples. I've been resenting my father for many years. He left us when I was small. He didn't raise us. He didn't care for us. This is a strong and long-term resentment. Or, my husband doesn't appreciate me, doesn't notice my virtues, constantly criticizes me, tries to hurt me. This is a small resentment. To be more exact, many small ones would have accumulated over time. That's why it's so hard. One more. I resent my friend's hypocrisy. I feel that she envies me, although she smiles to my face. This resentment may not be as big as in other cases, but unpleasant enough to spoil friendly relations. Right? Try to analyze your pain. Determine its severity. After all, you'll have to lift this weight and take it out of your heart. And in one case, you'll manage on your own, and in another, you might need someone else's help. What's your resentment? How big is it for you? How long has it existed? How important is it for you to deal with it? And also, think about how many small, unpleasant situations have happened to you. Did you cope with them? Or are they building up somewhere in the backyard of your soul? Conflict participants. Along with the fact that resentment is a wound in the soul, it's also a conflict involving two participants. There's always the one who offended and the one who was offended. Here is a story. Can you imagine? She, my closest friend, told my secret at the dinner table. And what did you do? Will you tell her that you're upset? I don't know. A month has passed since that day. We practically don't keep in touch. I didn't say that she hurt me then, but I can't let it go either. It hurts, and there's no trust anymore. In one case, you can deal with your pain on your own, without the participation of the other party, and at other times, it's impossible to do this because a dialogue is called for. And how can you deal with resentment on your own? In some cases, to do this, you need to understand the motives of the behavior of the person who offended you. Why did they act this way? It's important to determine the measure of their awareness in your conflict. Helen, what do you think? Did she say it on purpose to embarrass you? Or did she accidentally blurt it out? That's just it. I can't understand. Outwardly, she didn't show any sign. I didn't notice anything like that, but you can't tell. You know yourself how cunning women can be. The person's awareness of their misconduct is the starting point in your forgiveness. If the person committed something vile, by word or act, accidentally, and doesn't even realize it, that's one thing. If they did the same thing consciously, intentionally, it's a completely different matter. Why are you avoiding me, my friend? We used to see each other more often, call each other. Has something changed for you, or did I hurt you in any way? Well, how should I put this? Do you remember we were at a birthday party of our mutual friends? Yes, I remember, and so? We were sitting at the table and you said in front of everyone that I had complexes about my figure and that I was thinking about seeing a doctor. I still can't quite understand. Did you do it on purpose to embarrass me? She thought for a moment, remembering that day. No, it wasn't on purpose. I didn't think at all that you would react like this. I was just keeping up with the conversation then. We were saying something about radical ways of beauty enhancement, and I remembered that we had discussed this with you. Talking about this in front of everyone was completely inappropriate. I almost died of shame. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. Pay attention to what resentment can be like. Small for the offended and imperceptible for the offender. These details need to be noticed at all times. When a conflict occurs, this should always be taken into account. At the first stage, it's important not to aggravate the situation, but on the contrary, to clarify it, before the pain takes root in the heart of the hurt person and before the relationship is spoiled completely. And of course, the world is full of different stories. There are cases when a person takes offense, but doesn't even voice their grievance to the offender, and after some time, the unpleasant aftertaste goes away on its own. For example, someone's sister didn't congratulate them on their birthday. She forgot. At first, it might be unpleasant, and a thought might occur along the lines of, well, how could she not call to congratulate? But a week passed, emotions cooled down, and the resentment literally dissolved. Oh, it's nothing, it happens. It's no big deal. It's easy to deal with some small thing on your own, although there are people who cope even with great pain all by themselves. For example, children in orphanages. Being an orphan, is it a great pain? Very much so. A long-term resentment? Yes. Is it easy to deal with? No, it's difficult. But still, different people react differently to the same thing. Someone forgave their mother who abandoned them in adolescence, and someone did when their hair started to go grey, and others yet couldn't forgive her at all. And you should note that very often, in such cases, there is no way to get any feedback, no one to ask, "Mom, why did you give me up?" Imagine how heavy the pain of orphanhood is. And all this happening in children's hearts. Astonishing. Although, no, it's not surprising that someone copes with such a load and does find the strength to forgive, to pull out of the heart not just a splinter, but a large, sharp stake, and someone doesn't. We'll figure out later how this happens. Okay, let's sum up. Resentment is a conflict involving two participants. There is the one who offended and the one who was offended. One is guilty before the other. Sometimes you can deal with your pain on your own, and sometimes the participation of the other party is necessary. Sometimes the offender is not aware of having caused pain to another person, and among other things, just because they had no intention of causing pain to the other. So, we've settled this one. Let's move on. Guilt. What is it like? If one person takes offense, it can be assumed that the other is indeed guilty before them. Next, it's necessary to note that guilt can be imaginary or real. It's real when the offender really wronged the other person, insulted them, humiliated them, hid them, stole from them, deceived them, cheated on them, that is, did something that caused pain. It's imaginary when there is no crime, as it were, on the part of the other, but for some reason a grievance arose in the heart towards them. This guilt can be compared to unjustified expectations when you made it up yourself, and worked yourself up to get offended. Such situations are frequent in romantic relationships. She got offended, and he didn't divine that he was expected to do something. Also, guilt can be conscious and unconscious. The person you are offended by may or may not be aware of their guilt before you. For example, in the case of an unsuccessful joke, an unfortunate statement about you. If a person said or did something and didn't realize that they offended you. In my experience, there was a case where a woman was very offended by her mother-in-law. Their relations were very strained. The woman constantly wanted to talk with me about it, to discuss how unfair her mother-in-law was, how she didn't notice the good sides of her daughter-in-law. Once after her monologue, I asked her, "Tell me, what do you think? Does your mother-in-law realize that you're offended or not?" I went on to ask, "What do you think? Does she offend you intentionally? Or does she not realize at all that you're hurt?" No, I think she doesn't realize this. It's more my perception," she said. "So you're offended, and she doesn't even know about it?" "Well, pretty much." Tell me, how can you build warm relationships if one is offended, and the other doesn't even know about it? You can't but admit that this doesn't contribute to fostering a warm emotional connection. It actually distances people from each other. The worst is when people cause each other pain consciously, when they consciously insult, consciously provoke jealousy, deceive, demonstrate disrespect, and even allow themselves violence. It's one thing when they offended unintentionally, without even realizing it, and quite another when they were cold-blooded and calculating while doing something mean. There is a different kind of forgiveness with respect to these people. Here is a story. Like for many others, their relationship started beautifully. Romantic dates, big promises, popping the question. She accepted his proposal. As soon as she became his lawful wife, he seemed to turn into a different person. Rudeness, insults, staying out late after work. Sometimes he wouldn't come home for 2 days. He would drink and beat her up. People said he cheated on her. And at the same time they had children. 7 years of a torturous marriage ended in a complicated divorce. Do you think the heroine of this story had a grudge against her ex-husband? Of course she did. Not just a grudge, she hated him fiercely. Grave traumas like that take years to heal. Do you know what the most interesting thing about this story is? The ex-husband never said he was sorry. In other words, he consciously and systematically caused pain to the other person and wasn't sorry. Can this resentment be called fair? Of course it can. But, whatever the context of the relationship, the victim always remains alone with a deeply traumatized soul. There is a wound in the soul, but how do we deal with it, especially if the offender doesn't repent? If they never say they're sorry, there is no point in discussing anything with them, simply because it's useless. In some cases, a dialogue with the one who caused you pain is out of the question. But even in this case, you ought to forgive. Why, you might ask? In order not to feel pain, hatred, and thirst for revenge. Forgiveness is always healing. First of all, it's not the aggressor who needs it, but the victim. That's why you ought to make an effort. As in any other matter, in forgiveness there's a certain sequence of actions. If you follow it, you'll be able to forgive. If not, there will be difficulties. For example, you can try to forget your pain. Just forget. If you don't work on it, it won't go anywhere. From time to time, it will resurface and reassert itself, so you're not completely free from suffering. And what does it mean to work with trauma? It's when you remember your bitter experience and no longer feel the shock you did at the beginning. The ideal version of a trauma dealt with is when you look back at the past, remember the facts, but there is calmness, indifference at the level of feelings in the soul. Emotions have run their course, and everything is clear. Line by line, you explore your pain. You assess its severity, analyze the context of what happened. You roughly understand the motive of the offender's behavior, and perhaps you've already sincerely come to the realization that you need to forgive. But how to do it? To forgive emotionally and actively. By the way, at the beginning of our journey, we didn't quite specify what to forgive means. As life shows, people can understand the same thing differently. I'll say my version, what I mean in the context of our conversation. Feel free to take a moment to listen to yourself and think how you understand it. To forgive is to stop feeling pain when remembering a person. It means not wishing them harm, to have an even, calm attitude towards them, and even to sympathize, as the case might be. Forgiveness is when our deep self lets go of the situation with a light heart, accepts what happened. This happened and this happened. I've learned my lesson. I hold no grudges. It's as if you simplify your attitude to what happened. This is emotional forgiveness. This process runs at the level of feelings and personal experiences. There is also active forgiveness. This is when we allow the person to return to their original position at the level of events, to maintain a relationship, to return to work, to continue living together, and so on. Note that active forgiveness is not always supported by emotional forgiveness. You can allow the person who wronged you to remain in relationship with you, but at the same time, there may be no trust and no warm emotional connection. You may try to forgive and pretend, but you don't do it with sincerity. Why is it important to distinguish these concepts? For personal safety, at the very least. Conflicts are very different, and ideally, in all cases, we need to regain peace. But it's not in all cases that we ought to forgive actively and let the wrongdoer be close to us again because it may be unsafe. Let's suppose a husband is an unstable, aggressive person who doesn't feel any remorse. He also ought to be forgiven, but this doesn't mean that you have to allow him to return to his original position, to give access to your body, to your personal space, to your property. To forgive is to regain the lost peace in the soul, but not at the cost of your safety. Theoretically, any person may be forgiven emotionally, but not everyone should be forgiven actively. In some cases, intuition suggests that it's better not to deal with this person. There is no trust. There is a persistent suspicion that they will continue hurting you. Not because you think so, but because they don't repent, don't change, and don't promise anything. Why give them the opportunity to cause harm if their behavior is so bitterly predictable? As someone said, if you don't want to be spat in the face, don't offer it. This applies to people who wronged you, who need to be forgiven, but shouldn't be allowed close to you anymore. The unloved child. A conflict always involves two sides, and in order to deal with it, you have to understand not only your feelings, but also the feelings and motives of the other person. Therefore, I recommend exploring different psychological roles within this book because many people are playing these roles. Any adult used to be a child once, who needed parental love. And love, among other things, is care, attention, time spent together, shared positive emotions, a sense of security, and much more. After all, it's simply the feeling that I am loved and I feel it. Everyone has memories from childhood that indicate love, or as the case might be, lack of love, from the parents. For example, someone would go fishing, skating, or to the movies with their father. Someone remembers how their mother would read them fairy tales, or patiently do homework with them. Everyone has their memories, or conversely doesn't remember because nothing like that happened. And someone else's memory brings up images of emotional coldness. Some not only didn't get a fair share of hugs and praise that children are naturally entitled to, but were regularly beaten, called bad names, and derisively compared to others. Someone's memories hold scandals, tears, fear, and things they'd rather not remember. All of the above indicates how much love a person received or didn't receive in their childhood. Love is a feeling that, among other things, manifests itself in action, and the absence of love in inaction. Parental love not only stays with one in warm memories, but it is also a building material for the inner world. Parental love shapes a child's personality. This process determines what kind of person one will be in the adult life, calm or anxious, brave or cowardly, kind or evil, self-confident or not. On the internet, there are many stories where an adult talks about not being able to forgive their mother. She wasn't around, or she was overly strict and would beat, insult, and scold him for being like his father. In such circumstances, the child grows up without being loved, without being caressed. And after all, a sufficient amount of love received in childhood is the foundation of a healthy personality. If something was lacking in that period, it will inevitably manifest itself in one's adult life. And what happens next? The child grows into an adult who ideally should find a partner, start a family, and continue the process of sharing love. After all, this is why we start families, to share love. Imagine that your favorite cup has cracked. No matter how much you pour into it, it leaks. You pour from one side and it drips from the other. A cracked cup is an image of an unloved person. Unloved means unfilled. While in our childhood, love is mostly given us, in adult life we should give, that is, love, and also receive, that is, be loved. This is how it should be, but in reality, things may be very different. Someone gives more and receives less, or vice versa, gives less and receives more. This is when difficulties arise. In life, everyone gives each other what they have. I have love, I give it to you. You have love, you give it to me. And if someone is in a state of love deficit, it affects how they behave in personal relationships in adulthood when they grow up. For example, someone is excessively jealous. Someone constantly lacks attention. There is a feeling that they seem to be missing something. The level of inner hunger and anxiety is reflected in behavior. Tell me, will a spiritually fulfilled person demand something and be excessively anxious? No. Their life will be peaceful. They will live in creative peace. In creative peace. At this stage, it's important to understand that there are two varieties of being underloved. The first is when one didn't get enough love in their childhood, and when their current need to be loved is not satisfied in adult life. That's why, while in such a state, feeling spiritual and psycho-emotional hunger, everyone tries to satisfy it. But everyone goes about it in different ways. For example, in an attempt to fill the emotional void, They let themselves go. Promiscuous sexual relationships, alcohol, drugs, computer games. This is quick, short-term pleasure, whose concentration has to be constantly maintained. When their effect wears off, the soul feels empty, alone and bored again. More often than not, it all results in a broken life. Someone driven by a state of being unloved craves recognition and fame. Therefore, they're keen on building a career. Others in this psycho-emotional state will be completely focused on their own personality. Everything's for me, everything's for me, often ignoring the needs of those around them. And someone, having been unloved in childhood, tries to earn their partner's love in adult life while subconsciously considering themselves unworthy of it. The lack of love in childhood affects adult life. Very much so. It wouldn't be that bad if it were rare, isolated examples, but it's not the case. Almost every person, to one degree or another, is in a state of psycho-emotional spiritual hunger when they lacked something back then, in their childhood, or lack something now. What follows from this? When psychologically traumatized people form a relationship, unfortunately, it will turn out to be painful, and the partners will torment each other. They expect something from each other, demand, hurt and get hurt, but cannot satisfy each other's psycho-emotional needs. The more intensely a person experiences a deficit of love, the more they're focused on their own benefits. That's why people mercilessly, thoughtlessly cause pain to each other. Everyone is concerned with their own interests. Remember, our task now is to try to understand other people. Why do they behave this way? What determines their behavior? Why do they hurt others? Isn't it because everyone is preoccupied with their own need, the need to satisfy themselves first? Me first. Imagine you haven't eaten for a long time, say a week. Neither you nor your partner have eaten. Then suddenly, food is available. When you see food, the first thing you'll do is put a piece in your mouth, not someone else's but your own. This is how nature made us. First, a person satisfies their own need, and only then do they become capable of meeting the need of another. It's for this reason that situations arise in relationships where people don't hear each other. They don't understand the pain, needs, and desires of the other person. As you remember, a conflict involves two sides. There is the one who hurts and the one who is hurt. When a person hurts someone, they're focused on their own interests, especially when they do it intentionally, while being fully aware that it's unpleasant for the other. For example, they lie, cheat, steal, take advantage, humiliate, assert themselves. And when a person takes offense, it means that their interests have been affected, and they communicate this. You didn't call me, meaning I need your attention. You don't give me flowers, meaning you don't show love in the form of gifts. You don't appreciate me, meaning I need some praise, some gratitude. People get offended by those with whom they have a relationship. At the same time, it's necessary to take into account that every person has a need to love and be loved. It's precisely to satisfy our psycho-emotional needs that we look for a partner and start families. It is because in relationships it is possible to give and take, to give attention and enjoy someone else's attention. When the process of sharing love is carried out ideally, the way either side needs, then people are happy together. They satisfy each other's needs. They fulfill each other and share a feeling of satisfaction. If this doesn't happen, and partners don't fulfill each other, then the relationship involves pain in the form of misunderstanding and a feeling of loneliness when you're not alone, but lonely in your soul. There is mutual blaming. There is something that you or your partner don't feel happy about, and you voice it. This provokes rudeness, selfishness, blindness to the needs of the other person, and much more. Sometimes it gets to the point when, in order to compensate for their hunger and to increase their sense of self-importance, one humiliates the other. For example, a mother-in-law torments her daughter-in-law with remarks and makes a point of demonstrating her superiority. The way she behaves, along the lines of "you do badly and I do better," indicates that she needs recognition. That is love. Sometimes in other relationships, it might be expressed as "you are nothing without me," "if it weren't for us," "if it weren't for me," and so on. The bitterness of this topic is that through such distorted compensation, it's impossible to fill your emptiness. People can offend each other and be offended, but these bricks, not laid in childhood, are not going to be laid at the expense of other people's suffering. People can reproach each other, make claims, try to snatch at least something, but this doesn't heal. Something else is called for. To forgive, you need. In order to forgive, you need to understand not only yourself, but also the other person. Usually we draw conclusions based on the accomplished fact. He left, cheated, deceived, what a bastard. But what led to this? What's the story behind it? We turn a blind eye to that, because our own pain is in the foreground. It can be so strong that it feels irrelevant to consider the story behind it all. I'm a child of divorced parents. Abandoning the children from his first marriage, my dad started a new life. We grew up without him. Unfortunately, when the occasion arose, Mom would remind us time and time again that Daddy was bad. Of course, I don't judge her for this. I understand her. It's just that it wasn't easy to see the pain of an adult from the perspective of a child. It was already clear what kind of dad he was, but still, we missed him very much. In my childish mind, questions spun for years. Dad, why don't you need us? Why don't you need your children? When I was an adolescent, I realized that I was tired of suffering. I was tired of being a victim of a family drama. I wanted to change the situation, to change the state of my soul, my attitude to what had happened, to change my relationship with my father. I set about trying to figure this out. After school lessons, I would go to Dad's work. Back then he worked as a bus driver. At the final stops, during breaks, there was a lot of time for communication. It so happened that those final stops were healing us, healing our souls. It's amazing. You look at someone and he looks very much like you, or rather you look like him. He seems familiar to you, but at the same time he's a stranger, someone you don't know. Love and pain were all mixed in my young soul. Despite the fact that a child may have many complaints and grievances and wants to pour out all their pain in a stormy stream on the person who is involved in this, I understood that this wouldn't help. Such an aggressive approach wouldn't give me what I was after. So I was patient. I grew to be very patient and consistent. After school lessons and on weekends, I would go to his work and we would talk a lot. We were getting reacquainted, getting to know each other anew. Who likes what, who enjoys what was going on in life, what plans, what dreams we had. I asked questions and listened, then told something of my own. We started to get used to each other. Over time, probably even miss each other. While at the beginning, the consciousness of each of us relied on the pain of memories, like you see this familiar face and think, this is the one who once abandoned you. Then, over time, other associations appeared. This is the one with whom yesterday we drank coffee, ate a pizza, listened to the radio and laughed at something. At these meetings we talked a lot. I asked questions and listened. At the same time, little by little, I confessed my pain, my experiences. I wanted him to know how much I missed him, how much it hurt me, how difficult it was to live without a father. I did this carefully, so as not to disturb the atmosphere we had created. It was important for me not only that he understood me, but also that I understood him. Why did he behave the way he did? Why wasn't he around? It may seem that an attempt to understand the opponent automatically justifies them and removes responsibility for the bad things they did. No, it's not like that. Understanding your offender is necessary first and foremost for the hurt person, to reduce the degree of their pain, to reduce the significance, to learn the truth. In fact, there may be something completely different in a person's heart from what it seems at first glance. They may not be indifferent, but frightened, confused, unaware, cowardly. They may not be unloving, but they may simply not know how to express their love. At the end of the day, for all we know, this other person may also be guided by their pain, by their own truth. And when you understand the why, there comes an understanding of what's next. All this helps a lot in forgiving the one who has hurt you. After some time, I got answers to all my questions. I understood him so completely that forgiveness came naturally. I felt light, very light. It felt like I was a balloon from which ballast was dropped, and I could fly high, high, high towards the warming sun. Do you know what I discovered? That Dad loved us, my brother and me. It wasn't that he didn't remember of our existence and was indifferent to us. No. It so happened that the relationship with the children merged into one whole with the relationship with his ex-wife. We know that it's very rare when people break up their relationship and are on good terms with each other. Most often there is a lot of pain. And when it hurts, you want to forget and run away so as to avoid suffering. I discovered the pain he was suffering from when divorcing Mum. I understood his character. I learned about the circumstances that made him what he became, because he had also had his own childhood, upbringing, and a relationship with his parents. I felt compassion for him. I sympathized with him, because both of us suffered in our own way. We must remember that all cases are very different. Everyone's ability to understand, cope, and predict, different. Each person is a separate world and a unique case. The fall and mendacity. Very often, the cause of resentment in relationships is mendacity. The partner lies about their whereabouts, doesn't say what they're doing, hides who they're communicating with. It's especially hard if the truth turns out to be something terrible. There is a lover, an illegitimate child, a second family. The hurt person might ask themselves, why did he do this to me? What for? What did I do wrong? The attention of the hurt one is more focused on their own feelings. They start thinking along the lines of, why did you do this to me? This is one side. And there is also another. Come to that, why do people lead a double life? Why do liars need to lie? If we analyze how all stories of double life begin, it turns out that at the beginning the offender didn't have enough of something. Emotions, impressions, pleasure. But can this argument justify lying in relationships? I don't know. It's up to every individual how to see it. When you act as a judge to another person, you inevitably take some side. One of these sides justifies the wrongdoer,